Hey, so I'm going to do a simple little demo on a couple techniques that you can use to create essentially a light beam or some haze effects in your backgrounds. So I've gone ahead and wet blended in a dark background with a bit of an ombre, a little bit of white added in to create this sort of shape of our light beam where it's going to go. Everything is still wet right now. So as I begin painting in, they're going to kind of blend together. I'm laying down white, and then that's a little bit of my glazing medium, slow dry medium mixed together. So I've got the basic shape here. First thing that we're gonna do is mix a little thin amount of white, and I just use a little bit of the medium to thin it out so it moves a little better. And start laying in a couple areas that our haze might be a little stronger. Really bump up that contrast. The background is still wet and tacky, so they're gonna blend together. I'm using a rounded tip brush, but a flat one so I can kind of push stuff around and feather edges, and pinching off any water so I don't get a lot of like standing smears or anything. Right now we want to work very much like the paint into the paint that is already there, so we get a nice smooth effect so we don't have too much to paint over later. I'm doing kind of like a dabbing motion and switching the direction of my brush strokes all the time to create a softer effect, and now I'm using a fan brush which has a very, very soft bristle just to sort of tap and blur and feather the edges so that we get a little bit more of a blend, soft organic blending instead of brush strokes, right? Because haze has like no edges on it. So since our light source is at the top here in this version, I'm gonna go ahead and do that with pure white. We're gonna have to go over it a couple times because the background being wet means it's gonna kind of absorb in a bit. But I'm gonna slowly start pulling down from that light source area in directional strokes that go with the grain or with the beam of the light. As I pull down, if I'm always applying the paint on my brush when it's new, fresh white paint up at the top, that's always going to be the brightest because with the background still being wet, it's going to keep blending until as I get to the bottom, it's going to tend to be fainter. So it's one way to help make sure that you're concentrating your bright white up there. It's like as your brush dries out and the paint comes off, you can keep working down further. Now already we've got a pretty good sense of this light and how it's coming in. You can really see that it's starting to come through. We want almost pure white right at the top there. So it takes a couple layers, especially when we're working wet into wet, for that to turn out white. And then I like to have a couple little areas of beams that are coming through that maybe got some nice extra haze in them, and how those are showing the direction of the light, and a little bit of bounced light and collected haze on the floor. So I'm making sure to make it lighter again down there. Now I'm going to go ahead and do this whole thing in black and white. You could technically leave it that way. The background's got a bit of some blues and purples in it, also for depth, but then we're gonna glaze it with a yellow amber, like it was gelled. You could theoretically do this entire thing with it already yellow and amber, adding white into it to get the brightness. I like doing it this way because anywhere that's white is going to collect a lot of color, and anywhere that is dark is going to collect less when we go over it with like thin dry brushing and things like that. So it seems very controlled this way, but you could just go in with it a color instead of bright white. So we're gonna let this dry and come back to it. You can see kind of that haze effect there. One way we could bump that up, if maybe your background has already dried or something, is to get just the tiniest amount of paint on there and kind of stipple and smudge and use circular motions to kind of add haze back in. If it comes out too thick like that, a trick you can use is to get it wet or use a little medium to pick it up, because when it's really dry it doesn't seem to move as much. But that dry brushing technique and that kind of circular dabbing, stippling motion works really, really well for creating these like softer haze effects and just, you can really control it. You can work it up slowly. You can add a lot or a little at a time. And if I like to lay it down with the stippling effect, and then I like to either pick up medium or water on my brush and kind of glaze over it to soften any brush bristles. I accidentally didn't record the section where I started putting paint on it, but we'll do it over again. So here we are. I started just adding a little bit of some yellows and glazes over this, but don't worry, we're going to do it all again. So it's just going to keep getting more yellow. So I'm using just the tiniest amount of paint and going right in over the white, and you can see it's pretty opaque. It does pick up really nicely wherever the white is. It's a little more transparent over the areas that are darker, like the blacker background. And I'm doing this pretty dry. My brush has a little water on it, but you know, I've pinched as much water out of it as I can. So we're working very dry, very controlled. All of our blending was done in the white and black layer. Adding some orange so that there's shadow and depth even within our yellows. Where the light source is up at the top, I'm keeping it pure white and just sort of using a touch of yellow on the outside where it would like turn around, like creating a cone shape, almost like a shadowed effect. A little white and yellow to add some haze at the bottom. This is another way you can do this. That looks like terrifying and choppy, right? But we're laying it down, and then we're going to take a soft flat brush that has some water on it and slowly feather it upwards, which creates a nice soft blend very quickly. So that bottom has a lot more light and white in it, and then looks like it's catching more haze. I'm going to use that same flat brush because you can get such a nice thin line on it to do a little bit of bumping up our pure white up at the top and our details. So I think that even if you've got a colored light, there's always going to be areas that kind of seem more like a highlight to help it pop. You can also take colors with a dry brush now over the white areas that we did before and make them more yellow or a little red or whatever bounced color you need to be in the haze. And that's a simple way to create a lighting effect with some haze and some light beams. Hope that helps.